Hello and welcome to the Robert H. Wilde True Crime Show. I start all these things with a content warning because this is a true crime show and we deal with some very mature topics, and today the content warning is especially important. I'm going to change the wording slightly to we're going to be discussing a pair of serial killers. Now the question is, how many people did they kill? Because they did not kill as many people as they claimed. There's this huge disparity in what they did, and the theme is, are they prolific killers or prolific fantasists? However, in describing what they claim to do, there's going to be pretty much every awful thing you can think of. So the content warning is this one's appalling. But also fascinating when you find out what happened with law enforcement and everything. So if you're worried by the extremes of human criminal activity, this is not the one for you. So today we're going to be discussing Henry Lucas and Ottis Toole, who for a while were the most famous serial killers in America. They were the most prolific serial killers in America. And they were in the press for roaming around multiple states, raping, killing, torturing, cannibalizing, and committing necrophilia with hundreds of victims. But there's a problem here, because they didn't, as we will find out. They definitely killed some people, but at one time in America's history, it was thought they'd killed 600 people, and they may only have killed 3, and this is the story of what on earth happened. And they're also called the confession killers, because as we'll find out, it's the confessions which really caused an issue here. So, Henry Lucas and Ottis Toole, we're going to discuss both of them separately first until they met, and they both had pretty awful childhoods and early lives. So Ottis Toole, even by the standards of serial killers, had an awful childhood. He was born in 1947 in Jacksonville. His father was an alcoholic who mentally and physically abused him. His mother insisted on calling him Susan and dressed him as a girl. He was sexually abused by his family and their friends from a very young age, and later claimed his grandmother taught him Satanism. Now, as we'll find out, the fact he claimed this doesn't mean anything. So, he knew he was gay age 10, began an affair when he was 12, dropped out of school to frequent gay bars, had frequent epileptic seizures, which isn't really relevant to the story, but I like to fill out the background. His first criminal acts were arson. He discovered that setting fires turned him on. He'd become a prostitute by the time he was 14, and he claimed that his first murder was when he ran a client over with their car. But again, we don't actually know if that happened. His first arrest, which was definite, was in 1965 for loitering, and he started travelling around the southwest of the US, begging for and selling sex. In 1947, when he was in Nebraska, he was the major suspect when Patricia Webb was killed, but he fled the area, which doesn't make you look too innocent. And he was the major suspect when Ellen Hoffman was killed, and where he went, he left once again, very quickly. By 1975, he was back in Jacksonville, and he managed to marry someone, but he did this in order to conceal the fact he was gay, and his wife left when she realised after 3 days. So, not the greatest cover. Then we get to Henry Lee Lucas. Henry Lee Lucas is the focal point of what happens later on. He was born in 1936. His father had lost both legs in a train accident. He was the youngest of 9 children, and the whole family lived in a 1-bedroom cabin. He was massively abused as a child. When he was 8, his mother beat him into a 3-day coma. When he was 10, he lost an eye after his brother injured him. His mother frequently beat him. She was a prostitute and made him, "Hello Steve, good to see you in," made him watch as she worked, and she also dressed him as a girl and sold him for sex. He was roundly shunned at school, and his father died in 1951 after he got drunk and passed outside because there was a blizzard happening. After his arrest, Lucas said, "I hated all my life, I hated everybody. I was made to do things that no human being would want to do." He left the family home. Hey Foxy, hey Steve. And became a drifter. He had an affair with a half-brother. He started having sex with animals. Yeah, as I said, this one's got everything horrible in it. In 1952, he was found guilty of burglary and given 2 years in prison. In 1954, he was sentenced to 4 years for another crime. He claimed he first killed in 1951. He said 17-year-old Laura Burnsley, who disappeared, and she's real, but he claimed he picked her up, raped her, strangled her, and buried her. There's no actual evidence that he had any connection to her at all. And this, you may think, well, why? Well, we'll find that out in a little bit. In 1959, he definitely did kill someone, though. He'd started living with his half-sister, and he was engaged to a pen pal he'd been writing to from prison. His mother visited for Christmas and told him he couldn't marry. They kept arguing until Lucas's mother hit him with a broom, and he stabbed her in the neck and ran away. The mother was found but died before she could be saved, and Lucas was arrested. He claimed self-defence but was given 40 years in prison. Now, 40 years in prison. While inside, he tried to commit suicide. He was given electric shock treatment. And this is where the story should have ended, because he'd killed someone and had been sentenced to 40 years in prison. But in order to ease overcrowding, he was deemed suitable for release in 1970 and let back out into the world. Just over a year later, he was back in prison for trying to abduct a teenage girl. In prison, he formed a romance with another pen pal. On release, again, he was released. He moved to Maryland, married and lived with this lady, but the marriage fell apart and he was thrown out as he abused the daughters. So Lucas and Toole met in 1976 in Jacksonville at a soup kitchen. They fast became friends, fast became lovers, and Lucas moved in with Toole's mother in Florida, and the pair worked for some roofers. Lucas, however, groomed and began a relationship with Toole's 11-year-old niece, Becky Powell, and Toole was aware of this and didn't mind. Now, this is where things start to get complicated. According to Toole and Lucas, the pair began a massive murder spree. They and Powell would travel around the states, torturing, murdering, and sometimes eating prostitutes, hitchhikers, and anybody they want. Powell was used to help lure people in. What definitely happened is on January 4th, 1982, a 65-year-old man called George Sonnenberg was deliberately trapped in a boarding house by Toole that was set on fire. He died from his injuries. Toole would later sign a confession that Toole had killed him because they'd been lovers and fallen out. We will come back to this in a minute. When Toole's mother died, Powell was taken away from the family because the authorities, with very good reason, thought she was in a great deal of danger and being mistreated. However, on January 20th, Lucas and Powell vanished. Thanks, Steve. So, Lucas had convinced Powell that the best thing they could do was run away together. And they did. They arrived in California, and they got a job working for 82-year-old Kate Rich, who needed support and care, but they were fired for not giving any support and care and for stealing. They hitchhiked on, caught a ride with the minister of the House of Prayer commune, pretended to be married, and were given home and work on the commune. Powell, however, wanted to go home. Lucas claimed he was scared of losing her if they all went back. He'd be arrested, everyone was searching for them. And it's at this point that Powell vanished. Lucas told the commune she had left him and gone home. During this period, Toole claimed he was committing his own murder spree, livid that he'd been abandoned. Right, now we're getting to the meat of this. In April 1983, Toole was arrested for arson, and while arrested, he confessed to killing Sonnenberg. He was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years. And he didn't get out of prison this time. He confessed to the unsolved murders of David Shallart, who had been found on the side of a highway, having been shot in the head, and Ada Johnson, who was found dead near Fort Walton Beach. He claimed he'd lured her away from a nightclub, shot her and dumped her. Again, don't get too attached to the truth of that. Oh, glad you're enjoying it, everybody. Yeah. 2 months later, Henry was arrested for unlawful possession of a gun by the Texas Rangers. This was in 1983. And as well as the gun, police wanted to speak to him about where Powell was. They also wanted to speak to him about where Rich was, because she'd gone missing. On his arrest, he wrote to the sheriff, "I have killed for the past 10 years and no one will believe me. I cannot go on doing this. I have also killed the only girl I ever loved." And he said that he had killed both Powell and Rich. In his confession, he said he was scared Powell was going to leave him, and in his own warped mind, the best thing to do was to take her out into a field, stab her to death, have sex with the corpse, and then cut her up and dump her. He then continued to claim that she was the only person he'd ever loved, which I think we might find difficult to believe at this point. He then lured Rich out of her house in a search for Powell, stabbed her to death, and performed a similar thing with the body and stuffed it in a drain. He later went back, took the remains out and burned them. Lucas willingly took the Texas Rangers to where he claimed the bodies and the ashes were, but at this point nothing could be positively identified as even as them. However, because he had confessed and taken them to these sites, the Rangers began to believe all his confessions were real. When Lucas was in court for his arraignment, he rejected legal advice and said he'd killed over 100 people. And he started to be very forthcoming in police interviews. He told them all about this killing spree. And they went to Toole and said, is this true? Toole initially denied it, but Toole was a fantasist. He lived in a strange world, and he started endorsing everything Lucas said, and the Lucas Task Force was established. As long as Lucas kept confessing, he was given benefits. Taken to restaurants, not handcuffed, allowed free realm of the jail. He was also given access to files and files of crimes to refresh his memory to see if he'd done them, because he'd done so many and thought he needed a jolt. So he began to confess. He confessed to dozens, hundreds. He confessed to everything. He confessed so much that there was a 3-day event that saw 107 officers from 18 states who were shipped in to have a chance to question him about the unsolved murders on their books. A timetable of phone calls was sent to him. After a while, Lucas and Toole had confessed to over 600 murders, and they explained they'd been under the orders of the Hands of Death, a powerful cult which he said was rich, powerful, connected to organised crime, and practiced sacrifice. Not everyone at this point was convinced. A Delaware force already had a suspect that they felt must have done it, but the pair confessed. So, they soon appeared in court. Lucas was convicted of 11 killings. But again, don't get too attached to the truth of this. As well as his mother, Becky Powell and Kate Rich, who he definitely killed. He was convicted of Linda Phillips, Clemmy Curtis, Lily Pearl Day, Deborah Lewis Jackson, Diana Bryant, Glenna Biggers, Laura Purchase, and Laura Donez. The most controversial murder was that of Toole, who claimed that he killed 6-year-old Adam Walsh, a really big case at the time. Toole claimed he lured the child into his car with sweets, drove him away, beat him up, and cut his head off, drove around with the head and dumped it in a canal. Somehow, the police managed to lose Toole's entire car before the evidence could be collected from this. And while Toole was the major suspect, the investigation ran into a wall. The thing is, by 1981, having been able to find any DNA evidence because they lost evidence, the police closed the case. They said, "Our agency has devoted an inordinate amount of time seeking leads to other potential perpetrators. He is our only real suspect. He was never charged or convicted for this, but I think we're fairly certain they did that one. Toole was also put on trial for the murder of Sonnenberg and found guilty. But during the trial, Toole said something interesting. He said, "Well, I've only confessed to this, so I would be extradited to Jacksonville and get better treatment." Meanwhile, the police could find no evidence of the hands of death ever existing. Even so, Toole was charged in the same year with strangling a teenager to death in Tallahassee, given his second death sentence, which were appealed into life sentences, and he received 4 more sentences in 1991 for killing Mary McCary, Julie Peebles, Brenda J. Burton, and former Malone Mayor John McDaniel Sr. And that's the convictions. But doubts continued. And these doubts snowballed. Firstly, Lucas kept going back on things. He'd say he'd made it all up, and then he said, "No, I made up that I made it all up because the cult were going to kill me." But the real change came thanks to Hugh Ainsworth, who led a team for the Dallas Times-Herald. They performed an enormous investigation, some might argue the first genuine investigation in this entire story, which looked at maps, work records, traffic tickets, checks. They interviewed many people, and they worked out that the killers would have had to cover 370 miles a day to have killed everyone. They would have had to have travelled, in 1 month, they would have had to have travelled 11,000 miles with no sleep. They confirmed that when Lucas claimed to be committing a murder in Texas, he was actually in Illinois. And a Texas murder, he was in Pennsylvania. During a Nevada murder, he was in Jacksonville. Not even Lucas could be in 2 places at once. It became apparent that Lucas was just a very pliant interviewee who would confess to anything, and the police were feeding him information that he could confess to. Toole was a fantasist who just makes stuff up. It became horribly apparent that most, if not all, of Lucas and Toole's murders were just cases of the police rushing to clear their files up and accepting the pair without really checking. Why? Well, firstly, Lucas said he liked being treated to dinners out. Secondly, he said he wanted to make the police look like fools, and I think we could argue that possibly happened. So at first the police didn't really accept this. Sheriff Jim Bootwell said it's no hoax. Lucas has not been able to pull a hoax on these people. We're cynical. We like to see something factual. No man is going to continue to pull a hoax on hundreds of seasoned officers. To be fair to the police, in '86, Texas Attorney General Jim Maddox oversaw the Lucas Report, which took a full-scale look at where they should be. In one go, the Lucas Report wiped out a huge chunk of their confessions. Maddox stated, "Questions about Henry Lucas will be debated for decades. The report is not a final answer. There may never be a final answer." And again, to be balanced in all this, I have to point out that the Texas Rangers did not take all this very well. The Lucas Report had enrolled plenty of work from District Attorney Vic Feasel. Vic doubted Lucas when Lucas confessed to killing somebody that Feasel had already locked up for the murder. They revisited it and believed they were right, and he wasn't. Feasel later claimed that the Rangers were interfering with his ability to research things. He said when they attempted to digitally look up the killer's files in the state and national crime databases, they were greeted with access denied. That scared us. How'd they do it? How'd they cut us off nationally? He would claim that he was hounded by the Rangers and had to leave law for a while. He was certainly awarded what was at the time the largest libel award in US history when he sued for his treatment. So, just a second, guys, I'm just going to burp. I'm going to... Hang on. Sorry about that. One disadvantage to drinking Pepsi Max during a stream is that occasionally you need to do things that you might not want people to see. And we said, where are we in 2024 on this? We will never know the real truth. Estimates of the pair spree revised by investigations in time. For instance, modern DNA has already ruled them out of 20 killings that they were believed to do. It ranges from around 40 murders to just the 3. For instance, I said earlier that Lucas was convicted of the murder of Laura Purchase. She was 26 when she went missing in 1983. She had been raped and strangled. In 2008, DNA testing revealed that Lucas was not the killer, and a new suspect was investigated in 2021. But there's a lot more here than just, are these guys killers? Because the lies cost police and families the chance of finding real killers. For instance, Catherine Martin, she was found dead, tied up, stabbed 17 times, strangled, and her eye had been smashed out in 1982. As the police investigation began to zero in on truck drivers and their service staff, other members of the investigation went to one of the mass questioning events and got a signed confession from Toole. Toole was charged with first-degree murder, but by the time it became apparent he hadn't done it, all the evidence, including the murder weapons, had been lost. Martin's murder remains unsolved, the chance to solve it gone, because people focused on Toole. In the 2010s, Taki Alder and Robert Kenner started working on a documentary about the confession killers, which is on Netflix, if you are interested in that. And they really discovered what the meat of this is. This isn't a story about 2 killers. This is a story about hundreds of families and hundreds of victims whose chance for justice is gone because of their lies. There are hundreds of killers, oh thanks Steve, out there that will never be caught, that might have been caught because the chances have gone. And even now, the documentary maker said the reluctance of police to talk about controversial killers where they may have done wrong in the past was something they encountered. To be fair, many law enforcement officers are re-examining decisions that were made ages ago. Bakersfield Police in California reopened the investigation into the murder of Linda Atkins, who was found dumped in the highway and claimed by Lucas, and they are still asking for people to come forward. The Utah Cold Case Coalition has gone through the files of Leah Sharp, who was killed in '78, who Lucas said he killed, and found that forensic evidence rules him out. Local police are convinced and have reopened the investigation. The UCCC have a simple message for all police in 27 states that have a Lucas and Toole murder. And their quote is, because every case that Henry Lee Lucas confessed to is a cold case, it really has not been solved. Everything should be looked at again. There have been modern successes. In 1980, Kathleen O'Brien Doyle was found raped, stabbed and choked to death with a cord in her home while her husband was away in the Navy. Local police sergeant at the time got a confession from Lucas and he was charged, but the case fell apart because of course he didn't do it. Modern police have reopened it and have now arrested the now 70-year-old Dennis Lee Nauman. Doyle's father has been hugely critical of the individual investigation. He said, he told the Virginia pilot, "It is my opinion that my daughter's case might have been solved long ago if only the Norfolk Police Department had not been duped into believing a national scale hoax." Canna, who we met earlier, sums things up as, if we were to take a conservative estimate across America, 70 to 100 cases are still crediting Lucas for the crime, whether formally or informally. Which is at least, 100 killers free and opportunities lost. Hugh Ainsworth's Dallas Times Herald story is even more damning than I've been in these estimates. He says Lucas could not have been responsible for perhaps no more than 3 of the slangs credited to him. He always told me he only killed three people from the first night I let him. I thought it was bullshit at first. Lucas said, I only got 3 really, but they're going wild every time I tell them some more. I'm going to show them. They think I'm stupid. But before this is all over, everyone will know who's really stupid. There is an ending to this story in a sense, because Toole died in prison of psoriasis in 1996. He was never let out again. And Lucas also was never let out again. He died of heart failure in 2001. However, there is a very bizarre coda to this whole thing, and that is the resurrection of Becky Powell. In October 1992, police were more than a little bit surprised when the now adult Becky Powell walked in and said Lucas hadn't killed her. He just wanted her. He didn't want her implicated in the crime she'd helped doing, so he said she was dead. This was, of course, not Becky Powell. Becky Powell had been killed by Lucas. Instead, it was a 40-year-old woman called Phyllis Wilcox. She had begun corresponding with Lucas while he was in prison, and then began visiting him. And he told her, well, I only ever killed my mother and Powell's out there. And that he told her he genuinely had tried to avoid getting her implicated. He also told Wilcox that he loved her. Wilcox felt she loved him too, and devised a plan. She would pretend to be Powell. However, that was found out, and the ruse was discovered quite quickly. Now, in 2002, Ryan McMichael posted an interview he conducted with Phyllis Wilcox on his website. At the time, Ryan wasn't sure if this conversation was the right thing to do, and the web page no longer exists. But I have managed to get hold of a copy of what she said. And I'm going to give you 2 long quotes, seeing as these are so hard to get hold of. So, I thought that it would be interesting to get letters from him, just to see what he had to say. Well, his letters were so friendly, and the only murder that he said he committed was the one where he killed his mother. I got to the point where Henry was all that was on my mind 24 hours. I even dreamed about him when I slept. He was all talked about at work. It got so bad that my boss at work told me to find another job on account of it. I wrote and told Henry that I think I'm falling in love with him, and told him about him being on my mind 24 hours. He wrote back telling me that he was having the same feelings towards me. I knew that I had to meet this man and see if my feelings were real. Well, after our first meeting, my feelings for Henry were stronger than ever before. I really had fallen in love with him, and I had to fight to keep Texas from taking him away from me. Again, this quote was gathered by Ryan McMichael, originally published on his website laze.net, currently not there. And the second quote, I asked him about Becky Powell, and he told me that she left him at a truck stop in Denton, Texas, that he had gone to look for a trucker to take them back to Jacksonville, Florida, and when he returned to where he had left Becky waiting for him, he saw her getting with a truck with a man and leaving with him. That was the last time Henry saw Becky. He said that he told the authorities that he'd killed her so they wouldn't go looking for her to tie her in on the murders that he was accused of. Then I asked about Kate Rich. He told me that one was nuts and he had no idea what happened to her. He said they claimed that he killed her and cut her body up into little pieces and burned her up in an old stove behind the house of prayer. Henry said Kate was a big fat woman and it would take more than just him to cut her body up, and that the bones they claimed they found in the stove were just chicken bones. He said that an old stove didn't get hot enough to burn a human body. I'm going to skip forward a bit. He says, we visited for hours straight, and it only seemed like minutes to me. I enjoyed it so much, and Henry was the most wonderful man that I ever met. In a sense, Philip Wilcox was his final known victim, being completely fooled into all this. By the time she spoke to Ryan and Michael, she was aware of the reality of the situation. And that is the story of Henry Lee Lucas and Ottis Toole, who killed an unknown number of people but caused a level of chaos perhaps previously unknown in law enforcement, and there were ramifications for this. Why they had been able to do this was studied, and new procedures were brought in the treatment and interviewing of criminals. No longer would criminals be offered state dinners if they confessed. No longer would criminals just be given a massive box of files to have a browse through. If a criminal knows something about a case, it's because they know it, not because they've just read it during the day and have decided to make a fool of you. We will never know exactly what happened, and we will never catch everybody that killed all these people, and that really is the tragedy. Hundreds of lives and families will never get what they need. Okay, well, I hope you found that interesting. That is Henry Lucas and Ottis Toole. Hello everybody in chat. We'll just have a chat for a bit. How are you all doing? Oh, thanks everyone. Very nice to see that. I'd be honest, I thought this one was going to go on for a lot longer, but we've motored through it. Excellent. Thanks everybody. Yeah, and I redid a lot of settings and things, so hopefully things will continue to improve. Right, well, I'm gonna chat in chat, but I'm going to end the stream here, and then if you're watching on YouTube, thanks everybody. If you're watching on Twitch, thanks everybody. Just to remind you that the full write-up of Lucas and Toole is in True Crime Dossiers 3. I received the proof of manuscript back today, so not too long before that's on Amazon, along with 1 and 2, where there's all sorts of other things like this. Next time we might do a story that's not quite as horrific. I think if I start chaining these really awful ones together, might be a bit much for people. So we'll do something a bit more mysterious. We'll be covering lots of different types of true crime. What I'm really looking forward to getting to, just to give you a tease of what's coming up, is virtual kidnapping, which is where people manage to get kidnapped by people that aren't even in the same continent. Now you may be wondering how that's possible. Well, thanks to the internet, it is possible, and I will be giving you a full breakdown of the history of that and where we are now, because it is changing very quickly. And if there's one thing that if people take a lot of advantage of technology for good and for bad. So thanks, Steve. Thanks. Right. Well, I'll be appearing in chat in a minute if anyone wants to chat, but otherwise we shall end the stream here. Thanks, everybody.